Okay, great. Well, good evening and a warm welcome to everyone who is joining us tonight for our webinar with John Venable and Jennifer Grossman. My name is Kelly Bapavong, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator for the Young Leaders Program at the Heritage Foundation. In terms of housekeeping, I just wanted to encourage everyone who's not presenting to keep their audio muted and their camera off. This will just help cut back on distractions and help with all of our internet connections. If you have a question, please type it out in the chat feature of Microsoft Teams, and we will have a time devoted to Q&A in the latter part of the hour. I wanted to start off by giving a quick introduction to the Heritage Foundation and the Atlas Society, which is our partner in tonight's event. The Heritage Foundation focuses on building an America where freedom, opportunity, prosperity, and civil society flourish by performing and marketing research on key policy issues to audiences of Congress, staff members, and surrounding communities. That's why we're so proud to have been ranked the #1 think tank for public policy impact for 3 years in a row now. My department, the Young Leaders Program, hosts over 200 interns year-round. This summer, we're launching an educational program called the Academy, a virtual educational program that will cover first principles, policy solutions, skill development, and more. Students will learn the foundational principles of American political thought and the important policy debates facing our country. If you or anyone you know would benefit from this program, please shoot me an email or check out the website at heritage.org/the-academy. Joining us tonight from Heritage is John J.V. Venable. JV is a 25-year veteran and former commander of the celebrated Thunderbirds of the U.S. Air Force and author of Breaking the Trust Barrier, How Leaders Close the Gaps for High Performance. During his time in the Air Force, he served at 16 locations around the world as a forward air controller, fighter pilot, staff officer, and commander. He is led in the trenches and within the C-suite and currently serves as a senior research fellow for defense policy at Heritage. We're proud to co-host tonight's program with the Atlas Society. The Atlas Society is America's leading advocate for the ideas and literature of Ayn Rand, who, as many of you know, was a refugee from communist Russia who came to America, where she would write some of the most influential novels of all time, including Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, which happens to be among President Trump's favorite books. The Atlas Society was founded 3 decades ago and promotes a more open, less dogmatic approach to Rand's ideas, and under Jennifer Grossman's leadership in the past 4 years, has included a more artistic, narrative-based, and partnership-oriented approach to engaging young people with the values of reason, individualism, achievement, productivity, and free market capitalism. Jennifer Grossman was born in India, where her parents were serving in the Peace Corps. She studied government at Harvard with a specialty in Middle Eastern affairs, interned at the State Department in Paris, served as speechwriter for President George H.W. Bush, education policy director at the Cato Institute, and spent 15 years as senior vice president at Dole Food Company before becoming CEO of the Atlas Society. Welcome to both of our speakers tonight, and I look forward to hearing your remarks.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is J.V. Venable, and it's my pleasure to be with you. I'm going to share my screen in a big sense, and I'm going to walk through a little bit of administration with you. If you have not muted your microphone, please take the opportunity to do that now. When we get to the question in the dialogue section, it may be a great time for you to unmute once we cue your name. We're going to talk about 10 to 15 minutes each. I'll talk first, and then you'll just absolutely love what you hear out of Jennifer Grossman to follow. And then we'll exchange about a 10 to 15, maybe 20 minutes worth of engagement with you all, where we're probably going to learn more than what we convey. If that sounds like a fair use of our time, then we'll head on down the road. I don't know where you are in your life or journey, but we're going to kick this off a little unusually. If you'll go take your cursor, move it around your screen, at the bottom you'll see a little chat box. If you'll click on that chat box, that window will open up on the right side of your computer, and that will allow us to take a survey with you here right up front. Now, Kelly's going to help out, and she's going to type in a couple of questions, and the first one is, do you personally feel that your organization is right now operating in a crisis mode? The answers, yes, no, or maybe. And then once you hit one of those, please hit submit right underneath the bottom of it. Now, Jennifer, Kelly, and I will not be able to see what individuals rank, order, or answer in any one of these responses, but the congunculator will come up with a response that says how many people in each one of these questions believes one way or the other. Second question, do you feel that your family is currently operating in a crisis mode because of this virus, this coronavirus? Again, yes, no, or maybe, and then go ahead and click submit. And the final question is even easier, which is, do you think that your responses to these three questions will change over the course of the next 6 months? Yes, no, or maybe. And then make sure that you go up and check each one of your responses that you've got submit. And then that'll give us food for discussion once we get down to the engagement with y'all. Crisis leadership is a significant topic, and I've studied leadership my entire life. As Kelly noted up front, I went so far as to write a book about it, and I'm enamored with it. And if you were to ask me to bin leaders in one bin or another, I would come up with a couple of responses for you. One is fixers. People come into an organization that's listing, maybe not doing as well as it should be doing, and they come in and they right the ship and get it right back on track. One is sustainers. Here you find folks who manage places like Chick-fil-A and McDonald's, deliver a great product, and their job is to serve that at a rate and an expectation that satiates the customer's needs and the big bosses in the corporation. And the last one is growers, those folks who actually expand the franchise or increase the number of goods and services that are delivered by the organization. Any one of these has talents, and you may feel that you qualify for one or two of these different areas, but one of the areas that we're not trained for in any one of these bins is leading in crisis. And that's the discussion we're going to go into right now. Now, if you take the helm of an organization and you come in as a mid-level manager, you're going to set some organizational goals or team goals, and you're going to do that based on a couple of criteria. One is that you are given adequate resources, that you have qualified personnel who are capable of executing the job at hand. And the last one is the one for discussion for tonight, which is that stable external environment. In the history of most of us that are on this call tonight, maybe all of us, none of us have experienced the change that we're undergoing right now. This is that black swan event that has been talked about in technology and sci-fi thrillers for quite some time. And it's here upon us, and it's not just affecting us locally, as you know, it's globally. So how do we go about engaging our team and bettering ourselves in the process of this pandemic? Well, I can go in and tell you that in the organizations that I've led and the experiences in my life, I've had to deal with a lot of change and a lot of stress in organizations that were high visibility, that had underlying currents that were not quite right, or in my own personal health when I was diagnosed with cancer. Figuring out how to go about leading each one of those teams, be they the organization that I was charged with or my own family. Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that. But as opposed to use those as our example for tonight, I picked another gentleman that's relatively well known in the world of crisis management, and his name is Ernest Shackleton. Shackleton was an explorer in the 1914 era whose goal was to traverse the Antarctic landmass, to go from one side, hit the South Pole, and go all the way to the other, and be the first team and the first explorer to do that. He had fully outfitted himself through a bunch of donations and a bunch of generous benefactors. And he had actually had another ship beside the one that he would be sailing in that went down and put these little staging areas that would have food supplies and a place where they could catch their breath and get a good night's sleep as they went across on these dog sleds. He hired 28 very experienced and very capable men to sail on the ship that was known as the Endurance. And he would sail across a sea that was relatively stable for the time, going through the Antarctic summer. In the December timeframe is when he started his journey. And as he started south, he ran into what he was expecting. Ice flows, the temperature would drop, and then the winds would cause these sheets of ice to freeze really thickly and then come together. And he had a bunch of methods of getting through the ice when the time came, including going out and actually chopping a hole in it to where this icebreaker of a sailing ship could continue to muster forward. And in that sense, he thought he was pretty much ready for the environment. But as things would have it, the environment changed. And this picture is of the Endurance when it was actually landlocked in ice, locked in ice. The sheets had come together and actually pitched it up on its keel. And here is when he started modifying his strategy and the goal set that he had in front of him. He was no longer dealing in that environment that he had hoped for. And he decided to shift his goals to where once the sheets of ice separated, which may take a couple of months, then he would pick back up and they would start sailing further south and hit that landmass of the Antarctic region. Unfortunately, as things would have it, that ice and the pressure and the wind and the cold continued to build to where it actually destroyed the Endurance and pitched those 28 men out onto a sheet of ice in the flowing ocean and the Antarctic region. And for the next almost 18 months, Shackleton's goal set completely changed. He was no longer looking to be the explorer that made that expedition that hit to the South Pole. He was trying to get his 28 men back home safely. The lessons that he learned in that process serve us to this day. And this is what I'd like to walk us through in the conversation that follows as well. Crisis leadership, a couple of these things are going to seem blatantly obvious to you. And I certainly don't mean to insult your intelligence, but there are some subliminal effects here that we're going to walk through. The first thing that you need to do in a crisis is recognize the threat. Now, threats become insidious over time. And if you're on the Florida Peninsula in hurricane season and you hear there's a Category 3 or Category 4 hurricane several hundred miles out, that becomes noise over time. And you can begin to block that out. If you hear of a stream of these hurricane forming low depressions coming at you, that doesn't accentuate the hair standing up on the back of many people's heads and necks. It actually makes it go away. And this insidious effect grows over time. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not far away from where we are right now. We've been in this quarantine mode for a couple of weeks, coming up on 2 months and another couple of weeks. And when we step back out into that environment, only then will we begin to understand how bad the current situation is. Many will minimize the impact of it no matter what. You're hearing that on the television, the talk shows and the likes now. And many average American citizens will be looking to others to actually help them prepare and fix the problems when they come about. This is about actually stepping beyond that. The second step in this is to assess the implications of what's going on. It's been my experience in my life, whether dealing with my health or in organizations that are in trouble, threats come in waves and in orders of effect that are often measured in magnitudes. The best of leaders think in terms of the long haul, and they prepare for it as opposed to think about how they're going to get through the next week. In this sense, you've got to come to terms with what the implications actually are in the harshest way that you can imagine, in maybe the most realistic sense as well, and then come to terms with your emotions in that, and then figure out a way to compartmentalize those, because the way you conduct yourself as a leader with your team and with your family is going to make all the difference. The next is decide on a course of action. You know, there's a whole lot of thought process about how tumultuous the world is and how bad it's going to be potentially in another couple of weeks and months. It's been my experience that this idea of turmoil being a ladder to incredible heights is what I've lived my life and banked on. Turmoil can be a ladder, and your job is to identify the first three rungs on that and start moving up as rapidly and as deliberately as you can. Set those as goals and set the subsets of those and the things that you're going to need to accomplish and take care of as you go forward. This idea of seeing the threat and assessing the implications means that you have to maybe be willing to take action on it before others around you are actually bought into the idea that it's a threat at all. And you've seen that out of this administration over the last several weeks. Once you've got that doped out, then it's time to engage your team. And you want to convey the truth, the gospel as you know it and as you see it to the whole of your team. And then start taking this on one element and one individual at a time. Convey your expectations and that your team will execute to the lines that you've got laid in front of them with the goal set. Identify those rungs, make sure they're in your people's and your team's minds, and then go forward. And leaders, of all of the quotes that I've heard in my life, the one that sticks with me more than all others is one that Napoleon is attributed saying, and that's leaders are dealers in hope. It's got to be based on facts or things that are happening, but your people need to feel the hope within you, and you've got to convey it to them. Your energy is everything in this sense. Regularly meet with your people, and that this technology that we've got in front of us is just fabulous for this. My boss has set out a timeline where he meets with each one of his team members during the week, and he doesn't talk necessarily about the job. He's doing a dipstick check on each one of us, checking out how our families are doing, how our health, are we getting out and working, touching base with all of the pillars underneath the table of life, faith, family, friends, health, and job, and asking about what's important to us as he knows it. This is so important to us. And if you haven't thought about this in your adult life, you need to begin to develop a following now. A following maybe wasn't required before. A following is not something that people strive for in organizations that pay people good money. Very often they leave the responsibility of another and the incentive of another to pay and that assessment that you give them in their job evaluation at the end of the year. But start developing a following for you. And this means work on your commitment toward your people. Find out what their needs are and move to meet them as best as you're able to. Get blocking mechanisms out of their path. If they're having issues with these webinars and they need to do more of them in order to execute their jobs, get them the equipment they need. Help them technically and emotionally as they go down this path. And as you build that following of commitment, it'll go into loyalty and finally trust. And you'll start developing the kind of speed that will accelerate you out of this tumultuous time. And once you get out of it, your team will sail ahead of all of the competition. Develop a routine, get your people in it, and make sure that they know that you're out there for them. The final one that I'll give you is when you've got all of these things running in the course, then reassess and do a reassessment every 2 or 3 weeks, or when something big rises up that forces you to go through each one of these steps, and then re-engage your people and give them an update. Be ready to respond to those changing circumstances. They're bound to happen. And over the next 4 or 6 or 8 months, we're liable to cycle in and out of this for quite some time. The last thing I'll tell you is that in my life, what I discovered about cancer and me is that I never want to be seen as a victim again in my life. I want to do everything I can for my family and for my organization and for the sub-team underneath it to make sure that we don't founder, that we don't have those challenges that make somebody else come in and rescue us. Don't be a victim. Be the raider that goes out there and does things right. And with that, I would like to hand this over to Jennifer Grossman. I know you're going to enjoy her message. Jennifer, can you come up, voice?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. JV, I just want to say thank you for your service, and thank you for having me here, and thank you for your incredible book and all of the lessons that I've now read it twice. I am implementing some of what I've learned into my organization. I think probably some people on my staff are like, who are you? And what have you done with my boss? But anyway, there are principles in there, and there's a lot of practical advice, and I am definitely learning a lot. But the person that I've learned the most from, well, other than my parents, in my life is the novelist and philosopher Ayn Rand. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about the intersect between philosophy and some of the principles that she stood for, and what we're dealing with right now, and how does philosophy provide us with the tools to overcome. JB, you talked in your book about you need to have your principles. You need to have your goals, but you need to have your principles. You don't want to be, when you're flying information or when something goes wrong, just kind of scrambling with your preferences. You really need to have some core guiding principles. The coronavirus, the quarantine policies, and the travel bans implemented mid-March have resulted in a radically different environment. How we, as leaders of organizations or businesses, respond to the change invites us to revisit an analogy that was from my favorite of Ayn Rand's speeches. It was to the graduating class of the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1974. And she used the analogy, which is appropriate also with the aviator on the call, to an astronaut who had crash landed on an alien planet. We, like the crash landed astronaut, ask ourselves now, where am I? How can I discover it? What should I do? The astronaut, Ayn Rand said, who chooses the foggy, pleasant, but somehow guilty kind of hope over the rigors of facing facts, seeking answers, that astronaut is never heard from again. The same can be said of companies and organizations finding themselves on the foreign, uncharted, and challenging territory that is the economy of this new era. The coronavirus epidemic, the economic fallout, presents potentially existential threats to the survival of organizations and businesses without guaranteed sources of income. Circumstances also can present us also as individuals and as leaders and as organizations with unique opportunities, which, if capitalized upon now, could help us make needed changes and could potentially transform our organizations and put us on a path to sustainability and, as crazy as it is to say, potentially even exponential growth. There's one core principle that I have learned in the course of my career and from my study of the literature and philosophy of Ayn Rand that can help leaders guide our organizations and our companies through turbulent times. Not just weather the storm, but conquer the chaos and emerge stronger than ever before. That principle is independent thinking. It is the core principle of objectivism. Independent thinking is essential for surviving in a crisis because, and I've been through a few, myself. I thank God have not been through the crisis of cancer, but I've had, my house burned down and everything I own up in smoke overnight. not adequate insurance. And a community of people around me also in the same boat. It happened again. I don't live in Southern Florida, I live in Malibu, and this happened. But when you're in this kind of crisis, when you're in a terrible fire, you're in a natural disaster, or you're under a terrorist attack. I was in New York on 9/11. That crises are when we tend to fall back on our primal instincts. That's why independent thinking is so essential to putting those primal instincts, those fears, those panics at bay, and using your mind to recognize threats, creatively respond to them, and make hard choices that preserve your integrity. Because as JV talks about in his book, integrity is essential to building the kind of trust that inspires people, that builds the followership that he was talking about. Crises, emergencies, panics, pandemics, these are all times when many people are looking, what are other people doing? Looking for someone to tell them what to do, or just relying on wishful thinking or faith, and the results can be disastrous. I don't know if there's anybody on our webinar tonight who remembers the movie Sully, or the real life events that happened when Captain Chelsea Sully Sullenberger is piloting U.S. Airways Flight 1549 from LaGuardia Airport to Charlotte Douglas International Airport. 3 minutes into the flight, the plane strikes a flock of birds, disabling both engines. Air traffic control is telling him to return to the nearest airport. His computers are telling him to go back. But Sully uses his independent thinking to land the Airbus A320 into the Hudson. All 155 passengers and crew survived. The second, this is my favorite aspect to independent thinking, is creativity. If you think about it, the source of all human progress is creativity and innovation. Unless somebody creates something better, right? I mean, there can't be any progress. But something better is intrinsically something different. Creativity is therefore only possible to the leader who thinks independently and who's willing to be criticized and rejected. The book by Ayn Rand that best dramatizes this, of course, is The Fountainhead, okay? What do you think of when you think of a fountainhead? It's not just a pen, the fountainhead of creativity in that novel, which Kelly mentioned is the president's favorite novel. Howard Rourke is an architect who pursued his independent creative vision, which was radically different from traditional building design. And his nemesis, Ellsworth Toohey, a critic, tries to destroy his career. And at one point, there's that famous scene where Ellsworth Toohey and Rourke are alone, and Toohey says, "Mr. Rourke, we're alone here. Why don't you tell me what you think of me?" The reply, "But I don't think of you." The moral is that to be genuinely creative, and it's the morale too, in times of crisis, you've really got to get creative with reduced resources and limited options in coming up with new and different solutions. In that, you're best served by being open-minded to ideas that perhaps everyone else rejects as crazy. As the founder of the X Prize and pioneer of commercial spaceflight, Peter Diamandis, has observed, the challenge is that the day before something is truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. Privilege over the course of my career in working with visionary leaders who, like Howard Rourke, were willing to be vilified for their unconventional ideas. One of them is the late Ted Forstmann. Forstmann helped to pioneer the private equity industry, though he was also a very early and vocal critic of junk bonds. For this, if any of you remember the book or the movie Barbarians at the Gate, he was caricatured. But when junk bonds later fell into disrepute, Forstmann was hailed as a prophet. He incidentally also predicted the worsening of the credit crisis at a time when most pundits believed the crisis had reached its peak. Grossman argued that the excess of money, sound familiar, pumped into the economy after September 11th attacks in 2001 distorted decision-making of nearly everyone in finance. Well, I remember at the time, he was mocked, he was criticized, people laughed at him. But in the end, he laughed all the way to the bank. It reminds me of one of his favorite sayings: in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. Which is also a lot like Ayn Rand's line from The Fountainhead: the hardest thing to explain is the glaringly obvious, which everyone has decided not to see. Seeing things differently can be quite unpopular. It can be quite threatening. It certainly was for Ayn Rand. It certainly was for Ted Forstmann, that they thought differently and they threatened conventional status quo thinking. And I found in my own position, now leading the Atlas Society, that thinking differently, you wouldn't think it, is also threatening inside the community of objectivism. Indeed, when I think of some of the innovations that I have done here at the Atlas Society, whether it was my living history, impersonation of Ayn Rand, or our animated videos, or perhaps most importantly, my Wall Street Journal op-ed, Can You Love God and Ayn Rand? The worst critics of that have not been on the left, as you might expect. They've not been on the right. Here I am, invited by the Heritage Foundation to collaborate and have some fellowship. The biggest critics have been those in the objectivist Orthodox community itself. But it's precisely what I pull from objectivism. It's precisely my immunity from such critics that have allowed me to innovate and be creative. And it's precisely that innovation and creativity that has led the Atlas Society, with teamwork, to the position as the leading proponent of Ayn Rand's ideas. Finally, as a leader, during times of crises, and JV knows what I'm talking about, you'll be presented with some very hard choices. Let's take the current situation. If you are in a position leading a think tank that advocates against government bailouts, do you take government bailouts? If your donors ask you to do something that's not in the best interest of your organization or that compromises your personal ethics, what do you do? If donations are down and you're not able to meet expenses, how will you manage? What do you cut? Who do you cut? How do you cut? Integrity is revealed in how we meet these challenges in a way that does not compromise our commitments, our commitment to reality, our commitment to our principles, and our commitment to ourselves to lead a life of purpose, productivity, honesty, achievement, and benevolence. Crisis will confront you with many temptations, but if you've logically developed your principles and you've practiced them with some consistency, then those seeming temptations aren't really temptations. They're just different ways to fail. As JV captured so eloquently in my new favorite book, Breaking the Trust Barrier, integrity is how you add up how your engagements with faith, family, friends, health, and work measure up to the values you convey. We are not here to make light of what we're going through. Not everyone is going to survive this crisis. My father is a doctor. He's going in and out of the hospital. They've sent teams from UCSF to New York. We are not minimizing this. There will be too many casualties. People will lose their lives, lose their homes, lose their businesses, and lose their jobs. But for many leaders in crisis, there will be also times when you will wonder if you've lost your way. But if you honor your core principles, if you choose to lead your teams with integrity, you will not lose that one essential element needed for any recovery process. You will not lose hope.
Well, I'm getting a little back feed right now, but ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to us yammer for a little while. I certainly enjoyed your comments, Jag, and I look forward to any questions that are out there in the audience. Regarding that poll that you all struggled through right there, it failed miserably. So this is our first time trying to do it. A lot of people answered the questions, but most people's responses were not recorded. So I'm really interested in what y'all think with regard to the situation at hand and how y'all view it. Long-term, short-term, enduring crisis. What are your thoughts? Throw out any question you've got or any point to ponder. One last thing I'll say right now is I did not intend this to be an advertisement for my book, but Jack, I'm very grateful for the feedback on it. Really enjoyed listening to your chat.
Well, it's in my selfish best interest. I am in your debt as your trading partner. I have been deeply enriched by what I learned, and so has our team. So thank you.
Outstanding. So Kelly, do we have any questions?
Hi, sorry. We have a couple of questions that were emailed to me directly, and one of them was actually directed towards you, Jennifer. It was, how do you think Ayn Rand's background with communist Russia could have impacted her thoughts towards crisis management?
Well, I think it would have deeply impacted her thoughts about crisis management. And I think it's what made her so skeptical to central planning as a way of solving crises. She also detailed, I think, to an extent in her first novel, We the Living, how, one government comes in to do one thing and it implements one set of policies, which creates another set of problems, which they then institute another set of policies to correct. But it's such a blunt, instrument. So I think she would have been very, very skeptical and cautious about the limits of federal authority and the decision making at the very top. Obviously, and I defer to JB on this. I mean, this is we're under attack, as a country, and we are under attack as individuals. And that's why we have some of these, kind of martial policies that we're dealing with right now. But I think she believed deeply in individualism and in the individual's right to live their own lives and the pursuit of happiness. And I think we also need to be cautious about potentially long-term ways in which those individual rights are being compromised and under assault.
Great. And JV, there was one for you that was, we've talked a lot about what leadership looks like during a crisis. What about those who are being led? Is there any type of way that they should take direction or change their work style to match a crisis?
That's a great question. One of the biggest challenges organizations have is that stream of followers behind the leader. And leading the followers is a huge deal. And so I was just out at the Thunderbirds talking with the team that's in place right now to a team member who was on the team last year and is leaving at the end of this year, and another one who is in this year moving to next, and they're going to transition out of commanders. A lot of change has gone forward, and what happens when that young person comes into a new team is they get enamored with the old commander. And when they get the new boss coming in to take the lead, they very often will push back or say, boy, he's not as strikingly handsome, or he doesn't treat me as well. The new leader has got to have a team of followers behind them. And the best thing you can do as someone who is a sled puller, like most of us are in organizations, is turn around and motivate the others to pull harder right alongside of you in support of your boss and in support of the overall objectives of the organization. I know that sounds a little preachy, but honest to goodness, following one to lead another is our job. And as long as we continue to keep that in mind, you can give your boss feedback. You can tell them that they're a little bit off base, or boy, you would like it if they would sand off an edge. But when they tell you to do something that's within your job jar, something that's legal, moral, ethical, and fits all of the criteria, except it may not be the right colored hat that you wanted to wear in the process, wear the hat and pull that sled. That's your job. And your boss and your organization will feed from that effort.
Great. And there's a question here in the chat that says, how do the speakers see the current crisis winding down, and what does that mean to leading a return to, quote, normal?
Well, I know I can feel the crisis, or at least seeing some potential for crisis winding down in my own household of the Grossman family. I'm here with my parents in San Francisco, and my parents, by the way, are big liberal Democrats. So not that I'm asking for sympathy and talking about, lockdown with liberals, but I actually mentioned it also as an opportunity to show how one can really have love and benevolence and family, even when we're like in totally different political camps. But the rate, my point, and I did have one, is that my dad, who is a cardiologist, and he is no nonsense on any of this. He does not let any of us go out of the house without masks or gloves. I'm glad he's Jew. I mean, otherwise it'd be like Sharia house, like law here in the Grossman family. But he's just told my mother that she can have the house cleaning crew come back into the house. So that is my symbol that we are starting to turn things around. I'm also seeing on the scientific front, I mentioned Peter Diamandis, who is the founder of X Prize, is also the co-founder of Cellularity. They have, he's also our honoree at the Appetite Society Gala this fall. They've got a trial, they've got drugs in trial to treat virus, and other doctors that are investors in the Apple Society have drugs in trial, and they're promising. So I think those are good signs.
Well, Jennifer, I watched a bunch of the little tickers down below here with the initials on them light up when you said big liberal, because we've got several of them on the call here, and many of them are really good friends of mine. It's really, I love what you said about that, though, the idea that we can actually have a dialogue, even if it's not in agreement, but a dialogue. And when we talk about this, us climbing out of this coronavirus pandemic and the recovery, I think it's going to take a little bit of that rub. And I call that friction, where somebody tells you something and you disagree with it. How you go about disagreeing, as long as you voice it in a respectful way and continue to push it until it's been acknowledged, that will shape the direction and the trajectory we all take. And so when you need something in a society, I drive by the parks here in Fairfax County, Virginia, and it's one of those things that really bothers me is when You cannot walk in a park. You're not going to be hugging somebody. You're not going to be on a swing set in the same swing with somebody. You're just walking in the park, and they block that off. And you can't get into the park. It just doesn't make good sense. And so this friction that you're starting to see right now, as long as people keep it, in the respectful vein, it's going to make this give and take move in the right direction. Nobody wants us to end this and all go back into hugging and getting into the personal space of other people while this virus is afoot. But the idea of starting to close those gaps a little bit in different areas is where we need to move. And I think that Sabot Noir, I caught your question there. I think that's where we need to go, is to start pushing. And if you see a need as a business owner, if you see a need as a leader in the community, then you go to the leadership of the community and you push and get things to change. Don't expect them to change radically, and don't expect it to come when you're disrespectful. Go about it in the manner that you and I were talking about, Jennifer, in that respectful dialogue of disagreement.
Great. And Phil here asked kind of two questions on the same vein, asking about the trade-off between disease spread and economic disaster, and at what point does permanent economic damage outweigh risk of more death or serious illness? And I'm not sure which one of you wants to take that, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say one of the things that I found concerning in the public debate is that we have abandoned this concept of trade-offs. And, clearly that's very difficult to talk about when there are human lives involved. But if you are going to say it's not a part of the conversation, we're not going to tolerate that to be a part of the conversation, that's never healthy, okay? That's never healthy. I have so many friends, again, who just are totally deranged by the current, leadership of the country. They see it as something that is just, intolerable, something that they never could have seen coming. But I see like a through line back to the days of the Tea Party and back to those protests, which I was a part of. And I remember that, and I remember the hatred and the calls of racism and the attempts to just suppress and call racist people who had legitimate concerns about the scope of government and about taxation. And when you suppress that, and when you say you're not allowed to speak, don't be surprised if it comes back in a way that you may not like.
I completely agree with that, Jennifer. This is a great question. My wife and I spend a lot of time, and I think she's online now, so I have to be a little careful about what I say, but we spend a lot of time talking about the binary world. It's either a 0 or a 1, 0 or 1. It's not a 6 or it's not a 7 or a 0.6 or a 0.7. It's either full on or full off. And we as a society have gone full off with our economy. And the idea that it's got to go full on is what many people on both sides are thinking. The folks who are pushing back against the virus and want to keep it contained are saying, no, it's got to stay 0. But we need to start upping the amperage on that to where we start moving more and more towards a 6 and a 7, and eventually, maybe in a year, it may take that long to get where we're 9 or 9.5, and we're actually having meetings together in the same room. And I really enjoy that. The other thing I really enjoyed about your discussion there, Jennifer, was this idea that that I'm right and you're wrong, and I'm not going to listen to you. I had a friend who went to the Naval Academy. His name's Jim Buglowitz, fabulous guy, came in the Air Force because he saw the light, right? He knew which service to go into. And he would very sarcastically yell in certain situations, EBUS. And it was an acronym that stood for Everybody But Us Sucks. And if you have that mentality, you're going to not just keep your trajectory low, you're going to keep everybody from having the dialogue we need to go to 7, maybe just 6 for right now, but then start upping that to where we turn this economy back on, and it needs to come on. The idea that health is absolute, paramount, goes into this idea of safety. In the flying world, it's they say flying is inherently dangerous. Well, I'm not sure that that's true, but it is terribly unforgiving. And one of the things that we have to consider is it a 0 or a 1? And as a fighter pilot, we had to be up in the 7, 8, 10, the 10 ballpark at times. And the safety aspect took a second place to it, or maybe a tertiary aspect to it. But the way we overcame that was by integrating the thought process that safety is a byproduct of excellent tactics. And if we go about reopening this economy with that thought process, flipping it around a little bit and saying safety is a byproduct of a vibrant economy, and how we integrate that into a way that makes sense for everybody. The doctors can't say it's got to stay the way it is. The lawyers can't say we'll all be sued. Leaders have to step up and say, I got your advice. This is how we move forward. And you've watched the president do that, and I think quite successfully. We'll see how the next steps go for the nation. I'm optimistic, and I'm leaning forward, and I hope y'all are too.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on that. I talked about these animated videos that we do. They're Draw My Life. So we have My Name is Ayn Rand, My Name is Envy. Our newest upcoming one is My Name is Coronavirus. And the script is already out there. It's produced. It's going to be launched on May 6th. And it's the virus telling its story of where it got started and who helped it and what conditions under which it found that it thrived and who were its adversaries. And as with all of these videos, there's sort of dramatic twists and turns, and a moment where the virus says, if I really want to win, if I am the one I'm going to breed and I'm going to survive, capitalism is not my friend. Capitalism has given us one cure after another, one innovation after another. Soap, that's nothing. If I can cripple capitalism, me and my family of fatal viruses will win in the end. We can't let that happen.
Kelly, I don't know if you've had any more success. We've had a couple of technical glitches here. I've gotten several emails and texts about questions of folks who cannot actually enter questions into the chat thing. So we're going to have to refine that. But has anything else come through, Kelly, that you want to throw at us?
No, I think we have one last question that we haven't addressed. It's from Rohini Hughes. And JV, I think this goes out to you. He says,
it looks like Kelly froze up. Are you still with me, Jack?
Yes, I am. I am.
Kelly, you froze up there.
Oh, there she's back.
Oh, no. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry, no other questions have come in via email. I was just going to say there's one question in the chat here from Rohini saying, as an advocate for the abused military families leading a nonprofit advocacy, my advocacy suffers from military families that suffer before, during, and after this pandemic. How do I bring hope to the victims in this pandemic when their circumstances may not change? And we pray with them and provide them with the hope through Christ.
Well, Rohini, I'm grateful for your efforts. Of all of the folks who are going to be cared for in our society, probably the military is going to be the one that has the most resilient health care. They've got a base structure for most of the folks who live in the confines of a base or a caserne, and they're going to be well cared for. But I know that they will appreciate you voicing your concern and you executing your moves, both with prayer and with physical presence when that time comes about to lift their spirits. The folks who are not going to do well are the folks right now. The lagging indicators are that we're right at about 20% unemployment. The Great Depression, I believe the markers were right around 25% unemployment. And so the folks who are not leaving their homes right now, the damage that we haven't seen done will only start appearing when we open the doors back up and start doing business again. And for their sake and their well-being, we need to do that as quickly as we can. When that happens, I hope that there will be a city and a county and a state effort to bring about and muster the forces to bring those people help until they can get back on their feet with viable jobs. And Rohini, I'm grateful for you, and I'm grateful for your question. Anything to add on that, Jack?
No, I think that's wonderful. We at the Atlas Society are also concerned about military families and veterans, and we're very happy. There are a lot of great organizations out there. I think one is Operation Hope that we're partnering with to make sure that we can get our graphic novels and get other kind of fun reads out to soldiers that are being deployed right now. So I think I would just say, to sum it up from the point of view of open objectivism, is that, you know, the ethics of objectivism is about not sacrificing oneself, but it's also about not sacrificing others to ourselves. And we cannot sacrifice the younger generation. Their future is at stake. So I'm asking people to think about your children, think about your grandchildren, think about the reasons why you're doing what you're doing in order to pass this great nation on to the next generation and not destroy it in the process.
Great. Well, I think we're coming up on just about the end of our session here. And I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone who's tuned in. I hope that you've enjoyed the talk. And thank you so much, JV and Jennifer. JV, I met you when I was an intern at Heritage 2 years ago and have constantly been inspired by your leadership. And it's been great to know you. And Jennifer, thank you for all of your work at the Atlas Society. It's great. And I've loved getting to know your organization over the past year. And I'll pass it back over to you for any concluding remarks or anything that you want to leave our viewers with.
Jennifer?
Yeah, no, I guess I would also just say that this is opportunities for us as individuals. You know, we've been having a conversation about us as leaders, but you know, we are individuals too, and it is as individuals that we lead our teams. So to think about, you know, our choices that we're making right now as individuals across those pillars that JV has talked about, and no matter how bad you are suffering right now, you lost your home, you lost your family, you lost your job, you are sick, remember every bad situation can be made worse. So do what you can with what you have right now to strengthen yourself, strengthen your spirit, strengthen your mind, okay? Because this is not the first crisis to come. There will be other existential threats, and we will all be ultimately losing our lives. You know, we are here on this earth for a limited amount of time. So do what you can to strengthen yourself for the pressures that are to come. And a good way to do that, you knew what I was going to say, would be to read some Ayn Rand. Thank you.
Well, Jag, thank you. It's been a pleasure to meet you virtually and to work up to this engagement with you. You've got a big fan on the East Coast, and if you ever get back this way and once social distancing gets within a couple of blocks of each other, maybe we could have coffee together. I would enjoy that and enjoy getting to know the Atlas Society that much more. Miss Kelly, thank you for hosting us and setting all this up. It's been fabulous. And to all of those who have had the opportunity to get a couple of words in on text or on email, and those of you who have had a hard time with chat, please engage us. You should have access to an email or two somewhere in the chain in one of these invitations. and send the note. If it's through Kelly, then send a note to her and tag either one of us, and we'll sally up with our best answers, or we will recage our gyros and get to know you again, like I'm seeing so many familiar faces on the right side of the screen here. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the night. Please do your best to notch that, ratchet that dial up to 6 or 7 in your own mind, if nothing else. Stay well, and thank you for tonight.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Hello, John. This is Herb Foray.
Herb, great hearing your voice.
Real quick,